Okay, so in this video, I wanted to cover just the basics of working with images in basic HTML. Now you'll notice that I've made a note in one of my tabs here for floating images. This really isn't the preferred way to do it. The preferred way to do it is with CSS, and that's usually the case. CSS is typically a lot more powerful with working with these types of things, but that's a different video. So in this case, we want to just take a look at the basics of working with images. So I've got a couple of things here up on the screen. Notice I've got my Notepad++. I like Notepad++. If you are not using it, you can use Notepad. You can use a variety of things. It's fine. Notepad++ is great. When I want to save my files, it gives me the options to choose the file extension and so forth. I like to work with these multiple tabs because typically with a big website, you're going to have a lot of pages, and you can have it all open across the top here, and you can just click back and forth. Another thing you'll notice is I've got in this case, I've got Chrome, and I've got my end results here running in my browsers, and this is a typical setup for me when I'm coding web pages with HTML, because I can edit my code here in my tabs. I've got multiple pages. All I have to do is go to File, Save As, and with Notepad++, I can save as the type and just go down until you find the HTML right here and save it as an HTML page. Now, if you're using JavaScript, you might save that with a different file extension depending on what you're doing. Most of the case, and most of the times in this course, you won't. You'll typically do HTML. Also, notice the way I've named these. I've got images basics. Notice that I don't put weird characters, no spaces, and things like that, just a couple of pointers. In this case, I've saved these two files on my desktop. That's all I've done. Now, in Windows, the desktop acts as a folder. A lot of people don't realize that. So when you're working with images, you have to have an image. It doesn't have to be in the same folder. You can have it in an images folder. You can have images on other servers that you can reference pages and images on other websites and things like that, and pull them from there as well. In this case, for just demonstration purposes, I put my image, which I named ISO, and I saved it as a JPEG, and I just put it on my desktop. And since I've saved these on my desktop, then they're theoretically in the same folder, and that's what trips students up very often. Is remember, you need to have that image in the same folder, or you have to reference the folder in your code to make sure it goes to that folder and gets that image for you. Again, for demonstration purposes, I just tend to use the desktop a lot to do that. So first thing I did was I created an HTML page in Notepad++. I went out to the internet and I copied an image from somewhere off the internet of isothermal. That's the foundation building there by the lake, if you recognize that. And I can size it and so forth and save that on my desktop, and now I'm ready to go. So first thing I want to do here is open up my HTML, use my doc type. I know I'm using HTML5 there, and I've left out a lot of the other things that you could include here very easily, and the reason for that is I like to break things down to their simplest components, so I don't put a lot of other stuff in here, because I want you to just focus on this part, which I stuck inside the body tag. Notice that I've got an opening comment right here and a closing comment, and then I've got some text here that I'm going to work with that I can use to explain what I'm doing with the picture here. From here, I need my image source. SRC stands for source, equals iso.jpg, and notice I've got that in quotes. Another thing about working with images and anything like that is making sure that you have alternate text. Alt stands for alternate text, and what that means is, as you'll see up here, the alt attribute provides alternative text for the image. and that's for a variety of purposes. If someone is handicapped, they have readers or something like that, that alternate text will appear or will display in whatever type of technology that user may be using, if they can't see the image for whatever reason. And there's a wide variety of reasons why that can be. In some cases, it could just be that the page is loading slow. Maybe they have a slow connection and that image isn't loading well, and you need something there to act as that alternate to tell the user what that is. And that gets a little bit more complicated when you're talking about text readers and screen readers and so forth, but you get the basic idea, handicap accessibility. I can also specify the width and the height. Now again, typically I'd want to do that through CSS. I'd have my CSS appear at the top, my style, and then I can reference it in my code down here. But again, the purpose here isn't the CSS, it's on the basics of working with images with HTML. So keep that in mind though. This is really just the basics of HTML, and you'll want to use CSS for anything that you go above and beyond those basics. If you want to really change the styles and do a lot of fancy stuff with it, you really want to go to CSS, although HTML5 will do quite a bit of that stuff, but we're going to focus on the basics here. So again, we define that through the image tag. IMG stands for image. Couple of just a theoretical type of things that you want to be aware of. The image tag is empty. It's all about attributes. So we don't have a closing tag with it. Notice how I've done this here. I've got my image tag, and notice that it's all built in with the code here. And I've got my source, that's an attribute. I've got my alternate text, that's an attribute. I've got my width and my height. Those appear in red in Notepad++, which is nice. Those are my attributes, and then I can set those attributes. I can change the name here. I can change the alternate text. I can change this, the height and the width here as well. So remember that alternate is all about those attributes. Then from there, we can specify the style using the style attribute, and we can use CSS with that. There's a couple of different things that we can do here, but we want to work with the basics. So from here, once I'm done, I go to File, Save As, save it as an HTML file, put it on my desktop. I've already got my image on my desktop, which is right here, and now I can simply run this. I'm just going to refresh so you can kind of see it popping on and off there. So you can see that image is displayed, and it's displayed at that particular height and width. Now I can do a couple of other things. If I go to another page here, I've got my image float. A couple of things about the code here. I'm going to click on my tab, and I got to go back up. Same thing, I got my doc type, my HTML, my body, a lot of other things I could do here. I could do this with CSS. Notice we have a style attribute here. Remember, that's an attribute within our code here for our image, and I can do a variety of things. Also notice I've got this within paragraph tags. I can change that. This is something that you just have to get used to tweaking around with to get it the way you want. And notice I've used a line break. Remember, line break doesn't have a closing tag. I put two of them here because I wanted to bump it down so I get that little space. I can do that with paragraphs and things. If I wanted to put a paragraph and closing here and opening and closing and so forth, I can do all that. Just different, different habits, different way of doing things. But notice I've got the same attributes using the same image here, but one thing I've added is an additional attribute. This is the style attribute, and I can float that to the right, and if I want to float it to the left, just change that to left, and I can specify in pixels here width and height as well. So if I go ahead and run this, I'm going to refresh it so you can see it floats that image over to the right of this text, which is an extremely common thing to do on websites, particularly with smaller images. You got a lot of text and you want to put little smaller images around. You want to float it and so forth. Now when this gets more complicated, again, I do recommend using CSS for this because you have a lot more to work with as far as how you float it, how you manage your text, how you want that to appear on the page, and how you deal with the adjusting resolution of different browsers and sizes of browsers, what happens when somebody opens a browser to the image, and in the corresponding text, does it get longer because now it's closer together, what's going to happen below it, and so forth. So at that point you really want to move to the CSS, but this gives you the basics of working with images, with the basics of HTML5, and then to go beyond that, you really want to jump into CSS. So hopefully that'll get you started with it, and get you going on at least on how to do your layouts and how you lay out your pages. Use Notepad++ if you can. It'll really help a lot. If you've got something better, there's a million things out there that you can use, but I do like ++ better than the standard Notepad. But although I do many times in class situations, I'll just use Notepad because I like to break things down and say this is the simplest approach. But this is a typical way for me. I find it very efficient. I have multiple pages on my website open across, and I can move back and forth really quickly. I can run my pages. If you've got two monitors, that helps a lot because I can move this over to another monitor and have my pages, and it just makes it a really efficient environment. So hopefully that'll get you going. And take a look at the textbook. It'll delve deeper into this stuff. Take a look at W3 Schools. It gives a lot of examples and different ways that you can do it. But remember, you're doing the same types of things working with images, but you're either doing it through HTML or you're doing it through CSS. So don't get confused on that, and we'll talk more about CSS in other modules.